It's May 24th, 2022. And I'm sitting at the Monroe County Historical Association upstairs in the dining room with Mr. John Dennis, and he's going to talk about his life in Monroe County. And sitting with me are Tanya and Amy. So John, let's begin with where and when you were born and who your parents were.
Okay, my family was living in Bossardsville, and I was born in East Stroudsburg at the General Hospital in June 21st, 1935. My father was Harold Dennis. He owned the store in Bossardsville, a general store, which his father Amzie Dennis had owned, and his stepfather John Keiper had owned. He purchased it in 1864.
No kidding.
And at that time, his father-in-law, Jacob Bossard, was the postmaster of Bossardsville, which was 6 or 8 houses. But in the store, they sold everything in that store, from farm equipment to everything else, and the material were shipped to them through the railroad, which came from Wind Gap into Saylorsburg. And there was a railroad station right near the Brickworks, which was right near the old hotel, which is now the House of Horrors in Saylorsburg. Yes.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's actually right next to where Route 33 cuts under Bossards or Cherry Valley Road. There is an old cut where the train went through that area also to get to that area. So I lived right next to the store, and my grandfather owned the store at that time. We lived in the building which was the original phone exchange for that area.
How'd that work?
Really don't know how it worked, but my grandfather bought it and remodeled it, made it into a house. So it's over 100 years old. And I lived there until my grandparents died, and they lived in a brick house right on the opposite side of the store. These two houses, one on one side, one on the other. And when my grandparents passed away, my father bought the house, part of it from his sister, and we lived there while I was growing up then. That was in 1942 when we moved in there.
And how long was the store still operating?
The store operated until 1965, when my father had died a couple years earlier, very young, 56, I believe. And my mother ran the store for 2 years, but that's about the same time that the supermarkets were starting. And that last year, she didn't make any money. She actually lost money. And so they closed the store. They had an auction and sold almost all the things out of it.
You must have some memories as a kid and a young adult, right?
Oh yes, I was working in the store and different things, and later on when my brother, who was 3 and almost 4 years older, went to college, my father took a part-time job on the railroad, loading baggage at the East Stroudsburg Railroad Station.
Okay.
He loved trains and wanted to be near them and everything. And even as a child, I'd go with him. We'd go to the tower over in East Stroudsburg, and also one up towards Stokes Avenue, and one down near Portland in their little towers where they had the signals and gave messages and so forth. And when I was about 10 years old, I think, he took my brother and I up to the roundhouse, which was located just off Stokes Avenue. And there was a steam locomotive on the siding, and I was able to drive it.
Okay.
Start the engine, go up the tracks, stop it, and back up, which was really quite an experience.
Wow. Was that the tower you mentioned in Portland, was that sort of north of the town of Portland?
Yes,
right
yes, near Slateford.
Right.
Near the road into Slateford, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you're raised in Bossardsville. You went to school.
I went to school at that time. Hamilton Township had its own schools district before it joined Stroudsburg later on. but they had schools, one-room schools, about every 2 miles. So you were in 1 mile of that, you went to that school. If you were a little less than a mile on the other side, you'd go to that school. I went to the center school, which is on Bossardsville Road, just opposite Smith Road. And it's still there, but people bought it and put a big addition in front of it. So when you go by, you can still see the peak of the roof behind that house. But and then there's the Bell School, which my wife went to. My wife was Verna Blakesley, one of the Blakesleys from Blakesley. And so I walked, it was about 9/10 of a mile to my school, so one of my next door neighbors went to the other school.
What was it like going to a one-room school?
Well, it was really interesting because we had maybe 20 kids and children, and we had grades 1 through 8. There was no kindergarten, and we had 2 outhouses, one for the boys and one for the girls. The boys sat on one side of the school, the girls on the other, and there was a big potbelly stove in the middle. And yeah, and in 7th grade we got electric, we got lights.
How about that?
In that time,
So this was the 40s? No. When would that have been?
well, I was born in 35, so I actually started a year early. I started when I was 5. They didn't care much, didn't have regulations, I guess.
Wow.
So that was
So mid-40s or so they got electricity.
Yeah, 44. Let's see, 7 and it'd be 42, 5, 7.
Yeah.
Something like that. Anyway.
And you had little kids up and older kids. Were they separated by age in the school?
No. There were, as I say, there were maybe 20 students, so that means 10 on one side, 10 on the other. There were 2 rows of desks on each side, going back through the middle, and the teacher was on a little bit of a raised platform.
Like the Bell School, right?
Yeah, yes, and you know, so we had a little bit of everything. We sang in the morning, and
How'd you start the day?
by having a prayer and saluting the flag and singing a song, and then maybe singing another song.
What time school start no more? Do you remember that?
I believe it was 8 o'clock, and I think it went till 4. And yeah, and you know, and we had a small playground outside, very small, and I used to go out there and have, you know.
And did you go home for lunch?
Sometimes I'd go home for lunch. We had an hour for lunch, and it took me about 15 minutes or a little bit less to walk the distance. And
do you remember the names of your teachers?
yes, the first teacher was N. Henry Fenner, Norman Henry Fenner, and he was I'd say he was probably 55 or 60 maybe when he was there, and he was I guess you'd say he had a very intelligent mind. He could do figures in his head. You could give him like 6 numbers, 2 or 3 digits each, or 4 digits, and at the end he'd tell you how much they were when you added them together.
Okay.
He could do it all in his head. Really interesting.
So during the school day, while he's teaching the kids that were older than you or the kids younger than you, what were you doing?
Well, we were doing homework or anything, reading or do whatever else, but we had 2 rows on each side, and then in the front of each of those we had a bench about 10 foot long, and that's where the students went when it was their class. So we started with math, and I'm not sure if we started with the oldest or the youngest, but I don't remember. But they would have math, and they would have 8th grade math, and they'd go back to their seats, 7th grade math, and 6th grade math, and boys and girls would go up to there together, and the rest of us would sit and do whatever. Yeah, and you know, so that was the way we went. My second teacher was John Mackus. He had a farm. His parents had a farm near Hamilton Square, and he was a little bit Dutchy. He couldn't say his V's. It was wobbly as. And then my last teacher was Miss Helen Kirchhoff, and that was one of the women teachers they had at that time.
And what grade did you attend that school into?
Well, I had grades 1 through 8, but actually I started like in, I think, the middle of November that year. The teacher said, "Why don't you send John to school?" So I said, "Well, no," and then finally in November I started. And my children deride me because my report cards say that I failed first grade, because next year I was in first grade again. That's what my report card says. And the following year I was in third grade. So it was normal to skip grades too, because as you're sitting there, you listen to the other students and you knew what was going on. And at the end of just before the end of the school year in 8th grade, there was a standardized state test that you would take, and you had to pass that with a 75% in order to be advanced and go to Stroudsburg High School. And
apparently you passed it, right?
Actually, I passed it in 7th grade. I took it in 7th grade and passed, but since I had started a year early, they didn't want to send me ahead. And then in the following year, there were schools like in the Bell School, then there was the Red Rock School. Scioto had a 2-room school. Sailorsburg had a school, Snydersville had a school, Bull Run was a school, another, and actually, so all of the 8th graders from those schools took the tests. I was able to get the highest grade of them all, but
I would think as a bright student, being in that school, listening to the older students getting taught would absorb it.
Yes, oh yeah, as I say, like in 7th grade, I took the standardized test and passed it.
Yeah.
And,
so then you went on to Stroudsburg High School.
Went to Stroudsburg High School, graduated there in 1952.
52, okay.
And my brother, as said, who was 4 years older, wanted to be an engineer. Excuse me. And he, at that time, with the World War II ending, there were a lot of state schools that gave freshman engineering classes. So East Stroudsburg State Teachers College, which is now ESU, had a freshman engineering course through Penn State. So he went there for the first year and then transferred to Penn State, to the main campus. And I was going to do the same, but they stopped it. And because of the cost of it, I did a year at East Stroudsburg State Teachers College and then transferred to the main campus at Penn State. It did cost me an extra semester because of the requirements of certain courses before certain courses, prerequisites required, I had to go an extra semester. One of my professors at Penn State in traffic asked me if I'd go to grad school, and I said, "No, I don't have any money to go to grad school." He said, "Well, I can get you an assistantship at Purdue University." So he was able to do that, and so I worked half-time on a project for my master's degree and half-time courses, half and half, and this was a project approved by the college and the highway department. And so my tuition and fees were paid.
And in engineering?
Yeah, in civil engineering. And then I went to, I went there in January, and then I signed up and was a counselor in the dormitories. So I had my room and board paid for then too, so I was able to do that.
Before we get to what happened after college, I was curious about how you got to high school. Was there a bus?
By a bus, yes. There was a bus that drove from Stroudsburg here, out through Cherry Valley, into Sailorsburg, Scioto, Snydersville, and 209 into Stroudsburg.
Okay.
So that picked us all up, and it was a long ride for me because I was like in the beginning and all the way through the other towns.
Yeah. All right, so you graduate from with an MA.
And then,
Or an MS, in engineering.
Master's of Civil Engineering, yeah. Bachelor's and a master's.
Yeah,
and then in the summers, I had worked my first summer just out of before I graduated from high school, I worked in our store, and my father was doing part-time work on the railroad. So the first summer I worked at Keiper's Laundry, which is right down this street at the end at Ann Street, which was a big laundry. At that time, a lot of the resorts in the area had their sheets, pillowcases, and towels and stuff done at Keiper's Laundry. And they had huge washers and dryers and a huge mangle, which is a big ironing machine that they'd have two women, most of these were women, sending sheets through this, and through the steam and everything, they would dry them and come out smooth on the other end. They'd have two women there who would fold them and put them on a counter. My job was wrapping them and labeling them and all this other stuff. But this mango was so big that they could actually run a full-size sheet and pillowcases also. So they had 3 women on one side and 3 on the other.
How do you spell that word,
Mangle, M-A-N-G-L-E.
Oh, mangle.
I'm pretty sure it is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and that was a very, very hot job. There was no air conditioning, and they had all of the washers and dryers and hot water, and the mangle with all the steam coming off that from the water being taken out of it. So that was really something.
So that was a summer job?
That was a summer job my first year. The second year I worked for the quarry at Bossardsville. My grandmother had gotten some land from John Carmer. She was a Carmer, and she sold a piece of property to Tom Rogers, who had started a stone quarry. He had started one in Delaware Water Gap a few years before that, and it was not big enough, and the stone was really hard. But in our area, there's a lot of limestone, so there were a lot of lime kilns in the area. And he actually was able to mine the limestone and sell it as crushed stone.
Do you know where this quarry was in Delaware Water Gap?
Yes, when you're on Interstate 80 and getting off at 209 exit, you get on that ramp and you go wide to the right and then come back to go across 80. And just before you get to 80 on the right-hand side, you can still see the remains of the stone.
That's the old Crowsdale property, right? Where that manor house is?
No. Before that, that's the Water Gap exit.
Oh.
This is the one before that, but
okay.
447 and 209.
Okay. All right. Huh. Interesting. Anyway, just an aside, because I live in Water Gap, so I'm curious about this.
Oh, I was later on, I was the borough engineer for Delaware Water Gap also. And I surveyed the borough of Delaware Water Gap.
Oh, no kidding.
They had a big project for taxes collected on the motel that's there. And they didn't know where the line was, so they decided it should be surveyed. So I surveyed the borough line of Delaware Water Gap.
When was that?
Probably 67 or something about that, 1967, about somewhere in there.
So which hotel are we talking about?
You know where the fireworks store is?
Yeah.
Right next to it. That was a Holiday Inn, or not Holiday Inn, Howard Johnson's.
Right.
Yes.
I remember that,
Yeah. They were the township. Excuse me, the township and the borough, Smithfield Township and the borough were arguing about who get the taxes for it. So they had to have it surveyed. And that was actually I bought a house just outside of the borough. In fact, my property line is on the borough line.
The Dennis is on Cherry Valley Road. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that was me.
Ah. Does your son or your daughter or somebody still
My
live there?
daughter lives there now, yes. Yes.
I often see her walking on Cherry Valley Road.
Yeah, she walks way out sometime, but she just retired last year. Back to working.
Yeah.
Okay, I worked for
so after college, you got.
I worked for Tom Rogers at the quarry. He built a big garage and storage building and everything on the property, and my job was to separate all of the stuff from the other garage and store it in this building and label everything. So I had like boxes and boxes of stuff, that I had to put on shelves and put a index so we knew so they knew where things were and everything. And so I worked that summer doing that. And the next summer, that was 55, I was loading baggage on trains at the East Stroudsburg. My father got me a job there in the summer. There were a lot of, they use publishing company, did a lot of magazines, and they had big bags of magazines they'd ship out all the time. So I would sit in the station there in the luggage room until the train came in, and then I would get the big cart, take it out to the train, put it on the mail car of the train, and then take mail off. Well, actually, yeah, take mail off first. And then, so I did that in the summer until August the 18th, when the great flood hit Monroe County.
Oh,
and actually it was Saturday afternoon, and it had rained for days and weeks, and I got a call, or they got a call, and the boss came and said, you might as well go home because the rails are washed out down somewhere. So I went home, and our church was having a dinner that night. I went to that, and after the dinner we drove around out in the valley out there. No damage or anything, and then the next day people started coming to our store for gasoline. And I said, you know, why are you coming here? I said, well, there's a big flood. We didn't even know it, didn't have the radio on, I guess, and found out that, you know, East Stroudsburg was completely, all the bridges were washed out. You couldn't get in East Stroudsburg. And so a day or so later, Tom Rogers and my father and I went up to the water company up off Stokes Avenue to try and help whatever we could, because the water system was off. All the pipes and everything were broken from all the floods and everything. And then a short time later, my dad got me a job on a section gang of the railroad, which was quite an interesting experience. The foreman was an Italian from Italy recently and spoke very bad English and hollered at everything, and we couldn't understand him. And there were actually 4 college students working there. One of them became the coach at East Stroudsburg High School, the football coach. But we finally figured out that when he'd start hollering at you, you'd watch him and you'd go this way, and if he hollered more, you'd go the other way. But it was good, and then we were working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week.
fixing the rail from the flood?
Yeah, by Analome, we were hauling ties up out of the creek bed up to the railroad, and then putting the spikes in and all these things.
Wow.
And then I had to go back to school right after Labor Day. And then the next summer I went to work for Herbert Imp, who bought the quarry from Tom Rogers, which was very interesting to me because Tom Rogers and my father were very good friends. They lived next door for a while, and at that time the Democratic Party wanted him to donate a certain amount of money, and he said he wasn't going to do it. And not too much later, his stone was no good. It didn't pass the state specifications. So he sold it to Herb Imp, who was local here, and I'd built a business and moved to State College. And after he bought it, the stone was fine.
Stone was great.
Anyway.
He donated to the...
That's the way it worked. The interesting job I had, Herb Imp wanted to put in a portable continuous mixed blacktop plant. And they had a foreman for that, and he knew how the plant operated, but he couldn't read the plans and everything to do it. So I could read the plans and everything, being an engineering student, and so he and I put the plant together, which was really interesting for me, not knowing anything about that, but he knew that, and I could tell him where things went and everything. And then that got me into the blacktopping. My master's degree in civil engineering was in bituminous concrete, And at Purdue, they had a great school on that, a big laboratory, and we made samples and tested them and everything. That was my master's degree. Right?
Someday, other than today, I'd love to talk to you about the Roman concrete and how they lost, the recipe for making concrete, how it was rediscovered. I'm sure you know all about that stuff.
But anyway, yeah, so then I worked for her in the next summer. I worked paving driveways with his brother, who was a local here, Lloyd Imp. And we paved driveways and small little parking areas and so forth. And the following summer, we did highway paving, miles and miles of blacktop paving, and we paved the main runway at Allentown Airport. And then when I graduated, I went to work for him and did bridges, and we built a new runway at the Allentown Airport, which was interesting because we started in the early or late winter and started excavating, and we, it's 150 feet wide and 3 feet deep for all the base and everything. And then it started raining and we couldn't work for a couple weeks. And when we came back, there were 20-some sinkholes. In that area in Allentown, the limestone is erodible by water, it's water soluble. So we found all these sinkholes, which stopped everything, and we had to fix the sinkholes. And one of them was so big that we had to get a clamshell to get down in it. It was down like 30 feet deep. Excuse me. They had to find the rock hole to seal it with concrete so that you could build it up and it wouldn't occur or collapse again. And we couldn't find where the hole of the stone was. So they brought in a big tanker of water, tractor trailer full, dumped all that water in, and it didn't do anything. So they went and got another one. And then in about 15 minutes, it started going down, and those 2 big tankers of water disappeared. And then we were able to find the opening, and then we sealed it and then backfilled it. So interesting things. And then we designed a small bridge. I was a superintendent of it. The one thing that was very interesting, here I am, a young engineer, young kid, have all these guys, and we're going to build this bridge. So I told the guys, now look, we excavated this, now you can start building the forms, and you go in here, and this is what you need. And one of my friends, an older fellow, was a carpenter, and I had known him since I was a kid, and he comes over to me, he said, hey, he said, if you want to get these guys to work, he said, start cursing at them. So I went over and I said, okay, and okay. And we got along fine. Oh, that crazy things.
So how long did you work for that company?
I worked for him from 59 until 65. Edward C. Hess, who was the borough engineer and Monroe County engineer for many, many years, and he wanted to retire, and he wanted to sell his business. And my stepfather then, Tom Rogers, told me about this and said, you could do that and so forth. So I went and talked to him, and he said yes. He said, you come and work for me for a year and I'll sell you the business. And so I did. I left State College. We lived out there. After 3 years with working on construction, they asked me to do estimating in their office in State College. So I moved out to that area. And by then I was married and had a child. And I worked then until 65, and then we moved back. I bought the house down near Porter Gap, just outside of the borough, and went to work for Ed Hess. And a couple months after I went to work for him, he came back and he said, John, he said, I don't want to sell you the business and retire. Well, he said, but we could form a partnership or whatever. And I said, that's great, you know, with all of his experience and everything. And he said, I said, why not? And he said, well, I don't want to die. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, and he told me the names of 3 guys who he knew very well and I knew. They retired and didn't do anything, and they died in a few months. Anyway, so he worked, and we formed a partnership, Edward C. Hess Associates. And then I started doing some of the work that he was doing. And so we did that, and then I had to take an exam and become a professional engineer, because there's license to do engineering work, you have to be licensed by the state. So I had to study and then took the exam to become a professional engineer. Thank you. Yeah, and then I was able to do business, and at that time you could also do surveying. Later on, you had to get to be a registered land survey, you had to take another test, or a different test than as an engineer. But we did that, and then he started handing off things to me, you know, the borough, the township engineer, and a lot of the townships were meeting in the homes at that time. One of the first ones I went to was at Sterling Schoonover's house, which is now part of the rec area, and it's a historic structure. But he was the township secretary, and I had to take a plan to be signed by him. We went to his house at night, and there were 3 supervisors, and they were fairly older men at the time. One of them happened to be Frank Smith Sr., Frank Smith was the prothonotor for the county, and his father was a supervisor, and he had Alzheimer's. He had no idea what was going on. And the others were fairly old also, and they were mainly the people that cut the brush and plowed the roads and did this type of things. When the meeting, we sat in his summer kitchen out and back on rocking chairs and so forth, and they said, Sterling, we might as well get started. What do we got? And Sterling gets papers out and said, well, we got a letter from the county that says, well, what do you think we ought to do? Well, he said, I think you ought to do this. He said, okay, what else you got? I mean, that was the meeting. There were no motions, seconds, or anything like that. And you know, Sterling ran the township because he was the township secretary, an appointed position. But, you know, these guys, you know, and he did a good job. He you know, he was very honest in everything, and knew what was going on and did it. And there were a number of townships. Harold Mosier, we met in his kitchen behind the Mosier's Dairy, up on the hill, the farmhouse. We met up there, and there were quite a few of them.
What townships were you the engineer for?
Stroud, Hamilton, Smithfield, Middle Smithfield, Tocana, Tobyhanna, Chestnut Hill, Jackson, Paradise, Coba. I mean, there were only a few that I wasn't.
All at the same time?
Yes. Yeah, well, not all of them, but a lot of them were for many years.
You must have been very busy.
Yeah, I was out like every night to township meeting, and then that's the other thing. At that time, there were only a couple townships that had subdivision and zoning ordinances, and at that time, that's about when the development was really starting here. And you know, I believed and still believe that you had to have regulations because there were many unscrupulous developers. And so as a township engineer, I urged them to get a subdivision ordinance. And initially, we don't want no ordinances. We don't want anybody telling us what we want to do with our property. And I said, well, that's true, and I agree with that, but you have to have some regulations. And so I did township ordinances for subdivision and zoning ordinances for a lot of the townships. I went to Penn State Extension and took courses in land planning and so forth. and was able to get them to pass these ordinances. Some of them were very good and very, others were very minor. They really were at the point where they did not want anybody telling them what you can do with your land. But over the years, then they were been revised, and and they did it, and then later on there'd be a problem or something, and they'd say, well, we'll have to add this to it or revise it and so forth. So we did all of those
Can
things.
you think of an example of one where they really resisted and things didn't turn out so well?
Offhand, I don't know, but basically, initially they didn't want to do it, and I told them, you can always revise it. You can change it anytime. You have to have hearings and everything, and many of them did change it, and many of them did subdivision but not zoning ordinances, and then later on they did them as things developed. But at that time, when I started working for Ed Hess, he had a survey crew, a 3-man survey crew, I think 2 people in the office. And in a few years, we had 15 3-man survey crews going out every day doing development, staking lots and doing all of that stuff. Yeah, and then Ed Hess was the county engineer, so I became the county engineer. He eventually, in a few years, had got cataracts, and at that time, I don't know if they didn't know how to do it or messed up, but anyway, it ended up he could barely see. I know he retired and went to Florida, and he visited one time, and I was going out on a job just as he was coming in, and I said, well, do you want to ride along with me, Ed? And we went up North 5th Street, and we got up past the firehouse and so forth, and he says, John, where are we? And I thought, oh boy, he's lost it. But I said, well, Ed, you know where we are. This is North 5th Street. And he said, I can't see. He said, it's like taking 2 paper towel rolls and looking through them. He said, I can only look at that much. I can only see that much. And he really, but that was, yeah. And then all of the other little things, the redevelopment authority, I worked with them as their engineer, and did a lot of testifying as an expert witness as an engineer for different problems in surveying and so forth.
Can you think of any examples of where the township didn't adopt a zoning ordinance or a subdivision ordinance?
I don't recall any of them. I think they all eventually had ordinances. Some of them took much longer than others to get it.
Can you think of any examples where things might have turned out differently if they had done things slightly differently in that regard?
Not specific examples, but as I said, over the years, like a year or 2 or whatever, there'd be a problem because they weren't strict enough or didn't have the right things in, and so we revised them for them and got them corrected. Yeah. The other thing, another first in Kunkletown, I had to go to a meeting to get a plan signed. At that time, they did not have a subdivision ordinance. This was very early in my career with them, and I had to you had to have a plan signed by the supervisors to record it. Even though they had no ordinance, they had to sign the plan, but they had no ordinance, so they couldn't control what the plan was. But we took it, I took it down to be signed by them, and we were on the 2nd floor of the firehouse, and there was nothing in the room except chairs around the outside edge. It's where they had square dances and so forth. And we sat there, and pretty soon a woman came in and a man, and they sat in the middle of the floor with a card table. There were 2 men and a woman, and they had the meeting in Pennsylvania Dutch.
Okay.
And there was a new Pocono Record reporter, a young woman. She said, they can't do that, that's illegal. You can't have a meeting, it has to be in English. And She didn't say anything, but they went through, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes, and they said, no, can we help you?
Could you understand? Do you speak it?
No, I know just a little bit, not enough.
You think they did it intentionally to?
No,
It was
but
just the way they conducted business.
yes.
How about that?
In our country store, the farmers, most of the farmers spoke Pennsylvania Dutch, and they would come in there and sit around and talk and have a soda or something, and speak in Dutch. I learned a little bit. I don't know if I ought to tell you this, but when I was about maybe 10, one of my good friends came in, an older woman, and she started saying things to me in Pennsylvania Dutch, and then she'd laugh. And I said, tu bist un dummer Esel. And she said, what'd you say? I said it again. She said, do you know what that means? And I said, no, they taught it to me. You just called me a dumb... I was so embarrassed, I didn't have any idea. Oh my.
Well,
So,
go ahead.
in our store, on the second, it's a 2-story building, and on the second floor with outside steps to it, door on the side of the building, was the voting place for Hamilton Township. And they had not used it for storage in the store. Unless they got crowded, then we'd put stuff there, but otherwise it was left open. They had a little railing and so forth. My grandfather had painted an American flag on the wall, like 5 by 8 or something like this. And I remember being in there, and they had little sticks of wood and canvases on it, so people could go in there and to be separated and make their vote, and then paper and everything. As I said, my great-grandfather, his father goes back to the Bossards, and Philip Bossard came to this area about a mile to the west of there in 1743, and so I'm a direct relative of the Bossards.
Wow.
and my mother was a Metzger, and they go back. There's all kinds of Metzgers around, so.
So you've had an interesting life here in Monroe County, and an interesting career. Are you still keeping your hand in? Are you?
No. I actually I retired in 2000, and I'm an engineer, and I wasn't doing any engineering. I was running the business. I was the treasurer of the company RKR Hess Associates, and we had architects, engineers, planners, and all that stuff. The requirements for DEP and PennDOT and so forth, the new requirements that they had, as I said before, you have to have requirements, but some of them were really, really stupid. I mean, they would not let you do things that practically were perfectly safe, but because they had some regulation, you couldn't do it. And that really, I was so frustrated that I said, I don't even want to do this anymore. So I sold my interest in the business, and I did dam inspections for the company. I didn't want to quit and die, so I said I'll work 4 days a week, 3 days a week, 2 days a week, 1 day a week, and then I'll be completely retired. So I did bridge and dam inspections, just to go out in the field and did all those inspections for the company. And then finally retired completely.
Did you have anything to do with the dam and Delaware Water Gap up at Lake Latini? Did you know about that?
Up where?
Lake Latini. You know where Lake Lenape is?
Yes.
Up on the hill there was another lake that was a man-made lake, and the state came in 15, 20 years ago or so and took that dam out. You didn't have anything to do with that?
No, I did not.
Okay.
No, as I say, I've been retired for 20 years.
Yeah.
Ed Hess, before I started for him, working with him, had done, excuse me, had done all kinds of surveys for the borough to put a large dam up in the mountains. And they were going to have their water system up there. They still have some water system up there, but they were going to build a big dam, like East Stroudsburg has a number of dams, and Water Gap was going to do that, and then they decided not to do it.
Yeah, well, they used to get their water from the stream, from Caldino Creek, and they have some catch basins at the bottom, but now they're taking the water out of the ground.
And they have the big tank up there and everything, yeah.
So of all the projects you've been involved in, any that are you particularly proud of, or?
Well, I think like building that runway on the airport was a big deal, and you know, I built the little bridge down out in the country, out in I forget the name of it now even, but you know, I was the superintendent of that bridge, and saw that it was completed and everything, got it all fixed up. All kinds of little things happening all over. I mean, it's big jobs, little jobs. I did a job on 209 just south of Milford. Did like 15 miles of rehab. We tore out all the concrete pieces that had heaved and were making bumps and everything, and then poured new concrete in them, and then did a blacktop overlay on that. And that was, you know, that was my job, one of my first jobs to do, superintendent of the job. I was trying to think, on the one job out near Sailorsburg on a bridge, I was in the Army. I joined the Army in just in 1958. I didn't want to be drafted, so I joined the Army Reserves and went on active duty for 6 months, and then 5.5 years in the reserves. And I was in an engineering company, and in the summer camp, we went to down Virginia and learned how to operate all the equipment. I enjoyed running equipment here and there. And on this job down in Sailorsburg, the bridge job, we had the big hole dug to put the foundation in, and they had the roadway all built. And it was by winter then, so we were trying to work that winter, and we had about 3 or 4 inches of snow. So I decided I'd start the grader and grade the snow off the road so the guys could come in and everything to where we were working. And I went up to start the grader. The grader has what they called a pony motor. It was a diesel engine, and in order to turn it over to crank it, they needed a small gas engine. And that was right next to the big engine. And I got up, took it out of gear, got on there, started the pony motor. When it started, I didn't have it completely out of gear. So I'm standing on the back of it between the 2 big wheels, and we're headed towards this big hole, or this big grader. And I'm still not sure exactly how I jumped and hit the wheel with my foot, and it pushed me forward, and I grabbed it and was able to get in the cab and stop it then and everything. But I just was interesting, you know. One winter they didn't have any work, and I said, I'll do anything, you know. So I was at the quarry with one of these big Euclid dump trucks, driving it up and down the hills and everything. And then they had to blast, so I was helping the blaster load the holes. And they used fertilizer, which was in a container about this big, about 4 inches in diameter, and it had a plastic strap on it, and they had a rope you'd lowered into the big holes to get the faces of the rock to get it crushed. And they'd let it down in the hole and then give it a little jerk, and it would break the plastic. And we did that, and they had a big area they were blasting. And the guy said, here, now that you have 2 or 3 in there, just take them like this and open your hands and let them fall down, and boom. And I said, what would happen if that went off? He said, you'd never know it.
How did they ignite them then? Did they have to put...
At the very end, they would take a stick of dynamite, and actually puncture it, put a primer in it, seal it, and then drop that down with a wire attached to it. And they would run a wire, and then they had a little box about this big with a handle on it, and they connect that to it, press it down, it sends things and blows it up. They had them set, they had timers on them and everything else, so that, I mean, they were blasting like 30 to 50 feet high. These holes were that deep back off they had a face. In other words, they'd work to a face, and then they'd cut back in the hole.
How far back?
I think they were only about 10, 15 feet.
That's a lot, right?
But
It's a lot of material, I mean.
But yeah, but blasting it, you know, and it would be like maybe 100 feet wide, and they'd have all these holes, and they had them so that I forget, they told me that this one goes off first, then this one, then this one. It was just a slight delay, but they had fuse delays on them somehow, and that's why they had someone come in and tell them how to blast it.
Also, we kind of answered this question maybe, but I'll ask it in a different way. Any of these projects you're the proudest of? Would it be the Allentown airport?
Not really. It was so diverse. I mean, for the county, I got new toilet combination wash bowls for the old jail. I had to go in and measure the old ones and everything, and I didn't like that at all, because when I went over, they gave me a time to come over, and at that time, all these guys are out of their cells, and I'm walking in there, you know, with all these. And then I was also the Monroe County Civil Defense Engineer, and we had a Sunday trial, whatever. All the civil defense people would meet in the basement of the courthouse, and then we would say, well, there was a busload of people here and something over here, what would you do? And so we were doing this, and all at once the sirens started going off and everything. One of the people in the jail had killed the jailer, and Nancy Shakaitis and I were there, and we went up to see what was going on, and we got to the front door of the courthouse and opened the door, and there's 2 state troopers pulling in, driving up on the sidewalks, jumping out with their guns and running to the old jail. And I said, we better get out of here. So, and actually he had killed the jailer and was still in the jail. And they did catch him then, but I mean, you know, they got him and he put his gun down. And all kinds of crazy things. The ceiling of the main courthouse, a big, I don't know, plaster decorations up on the ceiling came out. So we had to, as the engineer, we had to figure out and get somebody and get bids and everything for them to do that. Went out, one of the supervisors went out with me on a bridge inspection. He wanted to see what we did. And he was going to a golf outfit outing or something, so he had his good clothes on. And I told him, I said, you know, I have to go down and look under the bridge. Well, I'll go along. I said, you know, it's soft in there. No, I'm fine. And he stepped and went down in. I mean, I think he had white pants and sneaks on or something, you know.
You've seen a lot and done a lot in Monroe County.
Oh, yeah.
And you've seen big changes over the years.
Oh, it completely changed. When I was a kid, my father at the store, he had a 38 panel truck, and on Wednesdays in the morning he would pack up groceries that people would order, and one person didn't have a phone, so they would send a penny postcard a couple days before with her order. Okay. And then we would get groceries, whatever, put them in the truck, and we'd go out Bossardsville Road out to Hamilton Square and down across, and then come back Cherry Valley Road and deliver groceries to people and pick up eggs. And a lot of this was barter. We would pay them for the eggs, and that would be taken off their grocery list, or we'd give them money for the extra. And then in the afternoon, we'd go into Cherry Valley, made a loop, 6, 8, 10 people, go to their houses, deliver the groceries, and pick up eggs. And then Thursday morning, we would come to Stroudsburg with the eggs. My great uncle had a butcher shop on 6th Street Earl Dennis, and we'd usually take a case or a case and a half of eggs, which was, I think there's 30 eggs to a thing, and there may be 6 or 8 wide, and then there are 2 piles, and then he would sell them during the week. And then the Worthington Mower had a big company down there. People would order eggs at their desk for the workers, and we'd deliver eggs. We'd also then pick up groceries, Kinz's on Monroe Street and 8th Street. They had a big store there with two or three stories. They had an old rope elevator, and they had tobacco. We sold a lot of chewing tobacco, 3 or 4 different kinds of it, cigarettes, chewing gum, candy, things like that. A bunch of people, they would deliver eggs there, and they, at 9th, well, right across here, the auto store, I don't know why, but they used to take 10, 15 dozen there for different people and everything.
And, so times have changed. It's not like that at all anymore.
The Pocono Produce had a open door where the at 6th and Main, where the Newberry store is now. That was an open air grocery area. They kept most of their stuff in a refrigeration down on 2nd Street, where the big apartments are now. That was an ice house. And they had refrigeration there too, so they would keep their fruit and vegetables there. And in the back of that, on one of the ramps where they could drive up, they had their office, which was not as big as this. That was their office. It's a little bit different now.
Yes, how different.
Yeah.
So what would you say is the biggest difference since you were a kid growing up in Monroe County?
Well, it's grown so much. I mean,
the population?
When I was young, I knew everybody that lived within 3 or 4 miles of me. Now I don't even know some of my next door neighbors. Friday nights, Main Street was crowded. You couldn't walk up and down Main Street without seeing people and people standing there talking and everything. It was.
And stores were open late that night?
I'm sorry?
Were stores open late that night?
Yes, yeah, open till 9, I think, at the clock. And so it's big change in that way.
Well, anyway, you have some notes there. Is there anything else that we should be mentioning today?
I think that's the main thing. I have 3 daughters. They've all graduated from college, and I have 6 grandchildren, a girl and 5 grandsons. And in 2 weeks, I'm going to have 2 great granddaughters.
Oh, no kidding.
So they're
congratulations.
Yes. And I'm trying to think of anything, the different things.
Well, you've certainly told us a lot.
It's I've been active in all kinds of things, and when I retired, I sort of decided to cut back. But I was a trustee for the YMCA, and I was a vice president of the United Way, and Chamber of Commerce board member, and I think I've held about every office in our church. I've been a Mason for over 50 years. I've been a Rotarian for 30-some years. A long time ago, about 45 years ago or so, one of the Rotarians said, "John, you help in your church kitchen. Could you do a spaghetti dinner for us?" So I said, "Sure, So we did a spaghetti dinner. I chaired that for 31 years. And we had anywhere from like 400 to 800 people we'd serve.
Yeah.
And it's the first couple were really interesting. I'm trying to tell, and I was fairly young at the time, and Rotary was old. I mean, I was the youngest one, and I was like 35 or something like that. And all these, and at that time you had to be an owner. So we had bank presidents and head of an auto store, and we did have a couple lawyers, but everything. And I'm trying to tell these guys what to do. And the one bank vice president came to me about halfway through it. He said, "You know, waitressing is a hard job." and I, you know, like I tell now, Bill, you're in charge of see that there's water on all the tables, okay? Yep. Next thing he's over doing something else and there's no water on the table, you know, so it was really, but as after every year we did it, and we tried to get everybody involved. So we'd have like 40 guys maybe. Some would come help make the meatballs, and some would serve and wash dishes and everything, you know. But yeah, that was good. And they got to enjoy it, doing it, you know. So.
Yeah.
We had, the first one we had was at the YMCA, and it was a disaster.
What year roughly, do you know?
Oh, boy, that was probably 70, middle 70s, I think.
Okay.
The president of Rotary told me, I have a man and woman that'll supply all the food. All you do is serve it and do all this other stuff. And they didn't have near enough food. We had like over 100 members, and we gave everybody 6 tickets, and they had to pay for them and either sell them, use them, give them away, or whatever. So we had like, that could be like 600. No, it was 10 tickets. I'm sorry, it was 10. So we could have had like 1,000 people, but we never had over 750, I think, one time. But we had people. The kitchen was on the second floor of the YMCA, and it was a small room. It was like half the size of this. That was it. And we had people standing on the stairs out to the street and down to 8th Street, just waiting, you know. And we had to run out. We ran out of food. We had to send people to get more food and get this and that and so forth. So.
Do they still do that?
With COVID, they haven't. So
Oh,
I don't know. But yeah. So.
Oh, you've lived a pretty interesting life.
Yeah, done a lot of things.
Done a lot of things.
I did, after I retired, my wife wanted to go to Australia. So we went to New Zealand and Australia, took a trip there.
How long were you gone?
20-some days. It was really, really interesting. I mean, Ayers Rock, which is one big piece of stone out in the desert in the interior, and it's really high. I climbed that thing,
Yeah.
and when I got down, we started like at 5 in the morning. When we got, and it was still hot, but not. When I came down, it was like 110 on the desert there, and yeah, that was really, really an interesting trip. We rode a camel to a winery. Interesting. Pete and Audrey Wyckoff ran a travel service, and Audrey had just been to Australia, and we were telling her what we wanted to do, and she said, "No, this is what you want to do," and she had an itinerary for us, and it really, really was wonderful.
Very neat.
And then the other thing is my wife was a teacher, a school teacher. She taught at Middle Smithfield when she started. And then when we had children, she stopped teaching. And but then when she was about 45 or so, she decided she wanted to find out more about religion. So she decided to go back to college to get a master's degree. She went to Moravian for 2 years, I think, but we were babysitting grandchildren, and she wanted to only take a course a semester, and they said, "Well, you can't do that. You have to take more if you want to do it." So she decided to go to Drew University. So she went there and got a master's of theological studies, which interesting for me because I told her if she had any problems, I'd drive her there, get her there and back, and so I went down a number of times, and it was really, really interesting to all the things. One time she had I took her down. She had a class, and it was 6 to 9. Yeah, I think it was 6 to 9, and on something in the Old Testament. And she said, "Why don't you sit in?" And I said, "I don't know if I can sit that long." And so finally, I said, "Oh, I'll try it." So I went in and talked to the professor, and he said, "Oh, sure, you can sit in." And it went so fast. I mean, it was like he was so interesting, such a great guy. Dr. Neil Hamilton, I still remember his name, and he retired before she completed it, and they had a retirement dinner for him. I'll never forget that. It was in the basement of this one building, big wide staircase down this, and we happened to be standing right near the bottom when he came in, and he comes down with his wife, and everybody saw him coming. He said, "Well, this is just like descending into hell." Oh.
Did your wife get ordained? Did she do it?
No, this was just the Master's of Theological Study, not to be a pastor, but she took a lot of courses with people that wanted to be pastors and so forth.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting. And another professor, there were only like 6 or 8 students, and he was a single man and elderly, and he invited them for dinner. So he would have something at his house and have them dinner, and I went down with her one time and said, "Well, yeah, you can come along too and have dinner with us." And he was really a great guy. I mean, just so nice, and yeah, so it was interesting with all these different things.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground here today.
Yes.
Maybe this is where we should, one final question I always ask, is there anything else that we should have asked you? But I think we kind of asked that in a different way. We've talked about a lot of things.
A lot of things.
Yeah. Well, then we'll call it a day.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.